That's gotta be Bill. Oh my god, that shot. Holy shit. That just feels like iconic imagery already to me. Let's see how they handle that. A full finale of Bill, but in that form.
I only had time to change one detail, a single number. 1 to a 2. 1 heart to 2 hearts.
Ah, Time Lords. That's 3 of them. Come on, Missy, show me something. There's been a few interesting reactions on her face.
They're not difficult, they're Cybermen.
Knock yourself out.
She did it!
Wish is my command.
Yes! Okay,
Secretly on your side all along, you silly sausage.
Is that true?
Don't spoil the moment.
kind of. I could tell she's struggling.
Seriously, I need to know, is that true?
It's hard to say.
Great
I'm
acting
in 2 minds. Fortunately, the other one's unconscious.
for now. What? No. Did something happen?
The doctor put you to sleep. You needed rest. What am I doing in a barn? What's wrong?
She's quite afraid of her.
The doctor has explained that you're not dangerous, but it's difficult.
Oh.
What's difficult?
She actually does.
Where is the doctor?
She looks like the Cyberman, doesn't she?
Injuries are being
She-
attended to. Injuries? I want to see the doctor. I need to
There's a
speak
reason
to him.
she's afraid. It's a scary sight. So Bill appears to be coming to, right? After a long time. Oh, beautiful. So from her perspective, it feels like herself. I think so. Given the other lady's reaction.
Everyone's too scared to talk to you.
Yeah, I think that's the
I'm
case. Okay, this is an interesting approach. Okay, this is a really interesting approach.
He's not me.
Why do I see a Cyberman in the mirror?
My God. How do you break this to her, man? These are the risks.
What do you remember?
It's quite a lot, you know? Down there for 10 years.
Your mind is acting like a perception filter. You still see yourself as you used to be.
Used to be.
It won't last.
What do you mean? Used to be?
Yeah, that's a Cyberman coming at him. Wow.
You left me alone for 10 years.
Don't tell me I can't be angry!
Hold on.
Because of that. Because you're a Cyberman.
Listen, she's got every right to be quite annoyed about this whole thing. I mean, annoyed is an understatement. Wow, look at that. Those are real.
What is that? Engine oil?
No, it's an actual tear.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be.
I am not upset.
Well, doesn't that take all the fun out of cruelty?
They gave him a bit of eyeliner, eh? Oh man, it's so difficult to see Bill like this, man. I've loved a lot of companions, but Bill specifically,
I remember you said you could fix this.
You could get me back. Did you say that?
I did say that, yes.
Were you lying?
No.
how, Doctor? How though?
Were you right?
No.
We're not going to get out of this one, are we?
Well, I'll tell you what else isn't possible. A Cyberman crying.
Right, a Cyberman rebelling.
Let's hope.
Oh,
Do she say?
Stand aside.
Do as she says. Is the future gonna be all girl?
interesting.
You can't win.
I know, and?
I honestly don't know what you see in him.
Likewise.
Winning? Is that what you think it's about? I'm not trying to win. I'm not doing this because I want to beat someone.
This is a day for nice shot right here.
Because I want to blame someone. It's not because it's fun. God knows it's not because it's easy. It's not even because it works, because it hardly ever does. I do what I do because it's right. Because it's decent. And above all, it's kind. It's just that.
Let's see how each one of them reacts to that.
If I run away today, good people will die. If I stand and fight, some of them might live. Maybe not many, maybe not for long.
But
Hey,
some.
you know, maybe there's no point in any of this at all. But it's the best I can do, so I'm going to do it. And I will stand here doing it till it kills me. You're going to die too. Someday. Who I am. It's where I stand, where I stand. It's where I fall. Why not? Just to the end. Just be kind.
It's a great shot.
Stand with me. That's all I've ever wanted.
Me too. But no. Sorry.
You stand alone, often. Yeah, Missy's still thinking. That internal tug of war.
Come here.
I'm sorry?
Come here, I said.
Oh, okay.
Seriously?
Oh, the way you burn like a sun.
Oh,
Like a whole screaming world on fire. I remember that feeling, and I always will.
his expression changed.
And I will always miss it.
Oh, I think she just stabbed him. Yeah,
Now that
she did, didn't she?
was really very nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, he can appreciate it. He can appreciate himself.
Without hope. Without witness.
Reward.
Without reward.
Oh, I was precise. You'll be able to make it back to your TARDIS.
Surgical.
Maybe even get a cuppa. Although,
And then
right,
regenerate.
And then regenerate into you.
That's the...
Welcome to the side.
Why?
because he's right. Because it's time to stand with him. It's where we've always been going, and it's happening now, today. It's time to stand with the Doctor.
I will never stand with the Doctor!
Jeez.
My dear, you will.
Don't bother trying to regenerate. You got the full blast.
Oh. Yeah. Should have expected it, right? From yourself.
This is where we've always been going. This is our perfect ending.
Wow. It kind of really is, isn't it?
In the back.
Oh. Okay, if that's that.
I'm not a doctor.
I'm the Doctor.
I am the Doctor. The original, you might say. Doctor, let it go. Time enough.
But I saw the cold open. Oh.
Deadly stars.
You deserve stars. And then so much more. Again, cold open. So all hope is not lost. Oh my god. Heather. Hey. Yeah. Whoa.
Am I dead?
You seem alive enough.
Does that feel dead to you? Left you my tears, remember?
I'm never gonna believe you're really dead. Because one day, everyone's just gonna need you too much. It's a big universe. I hope I see you again.
Left you a tear. There's hope. Ah, there's tears. Of course you don't. This should take me to the cold open.
When the doctor was me, it started. I'm regenerating. No! No!
Tears in the beard. That's a constant, isn't it? Okay.
Where have you taken me? If you're trying to make a point, I'm not listening. I don't want to change again.
The exact place you need to be at this
Never
point.
again.
Most likely. Never again.
I can't keep on being somebody else. Will not change.
I will not change. I will not. No. The whole thing's ridiculous.
That sounds so familiar.
Someone there.
Who is that?
I'm the doctor.
The doctor.
Oh my god, that's him!
I don't think so. No, dear me, no. You may be a doctor, but I am the doctor. The original, you might say.
Wow. Didn't see that coming. David Bradley. Okay, so let's get into it, folks. Yeah, I must admit it's rather strange. The feeling is rather strange at this moment because it is my last ever Doctor Who finale on YouTube. It is. And I mean, the thing is, I could not have asked for a better finale. Like, seriously, honestly, it legitimately ended up being quite the finale. Quite the brilliant finale. And honestly, I think it actually possibly is the best of the series as well, right? I mean, at the least, even objectively speaking, it's certainly a contender, right, for the best series finale of the series. Again, the whole season series thing kind of, it gets jumbled up sometimes. But yeah, in this case, let's say, it's the best season finale of the series, and the series being Doctor Who. But again, preference is a thing as well. I'm sure many of you prefer perhaps one of the finales from the first 4 series, right? The Tennant and Eccleston era. Then maybe there's some that prefer some of the finales from the Matt Smith era, right? And then, of course, I'm sure there's some that prefer some of the finales, and then this finale specifically in this case as well, from the Capaldi era, right? But yeah, as I sit here, I really do feel that that might just be the best finale. That might just be the strongest finale. And, for once, though, there's elements of this in some of the Matt Smith finales as well, maybe some of the later Matt Smith finales. But here, this is such a different type of finale. It's a totally different type of tone. Yes, it has its own, bombastic moments, but even those moments are just, sprinkled in, near the conclusion, a few of those moments in the middle, but for the most part, it's a slow burn, right? It's quite the introspective finale. At no point did it feel like anything is being rushed. It's been given, it's certainly been given the finale treatment in terms of the runtime, and that runtime is just used to great effect, in my opinion. I think it's actually used perfectly, right? I really, really enjoyed this type of finale. And, it's like beating a dead horse. And maybe some of you might be, tired of me kind of ripping on some of the finales of the past. But, I'm here to give you my honest take. And as you know, for the most part, especially in the early days, I felt that a lot of the finales kind of, fall flat. and fall flat in the sense that, for me, they all always kind of ended up being the same. It's the exact same formula, right? It's super bombastic. The actual finale, it's just these big grand moments, moment after moment. But I'd say, as the series goes on, those finales got better and better. And listen, again, it's all a matter of perspective and opinion and preference. I'm sure many of you enjoyed those finales. I just always felt that the penultimate episode, right before the finales, always used to be better. Now, do I believe that's still the case here? Yes, I do believe the last episode is a better episode. For me, I know that should be a given, given that this is on my channel and, I'm giving my review and analysis. But, I think it's always important to sometimes still point that out because, sometimes people get a little bit, I don't know, defensive, let's just say on the internet. But here, I think it's a really unique case, right? Even though I do think it continues that trend, for me at least, of, the penultimate episode being a little bit better. The finale I got here, it's just, it's at a different level in comparison to most of the finales I've had in Doctor Who. That, it's not the same comparison. It's just not. Here it really truly is like a preference thing. I just preferred the last episode. My thoughts on it. Just how much it blew me away and how much it just really captured my imagination. And it's essentially lightning in a bottle. Right? That's the type of episode that was. Immediately felt like an all-timer. And listen, speaking of all-timers, I can easily see this episode being in like a top 10 for me. Yeah, I think I can say that. It is a top 10 Doctor Who episode for me. But, once again, going back to the slow burn nature of this finale, right? The introspective nature, the character study aspect of it. And, it's able to really focus, given the runtime and the slow burn nature of it, it's really able to focus on many of these important characters. Of course, the Doctor, Peter Capaldi's Doctor, is center stage, right? In comparison to the last episode. He's not center stage there, but even there, it made sense for him to not be center stage. Right? There made a lot of sense, again, because of the time dilation aspect of it. But here, rightfully so, Capaldi's Doctor is center stage. And, the thing is, this actually legitimately felt like the culmination of not just Capaldi's arc, but just this era as a whole. It truly felt like the end of an era, right? And, there's some telltale signs present within this episode and just in the conclusion as well to point towards that. And, the thing is, one of the highest compliments I can give this episode is that somehow, even though there is another, outing, another story, one final outing, one final story in this Christmas special that's coming up. And I've always known that leading up to this. And again, the cold open of the last episode made it rather clear. And, you can kind of go back and forth on, the choice to put that in there. But yeah, I think the highest compliment I can give this episode is that even if there is another follow-up to this, this still functions as a perfect finale, right? A legitimate, end of an era type finale, right? If Capaldi's Doctor actually regenerated inside of that TARDIS in this moment, in that finale, in the conclusion rather, that would have been perfect. It would have been just perfect, right? It actually could have functioned quite easily as a finale, as a final episode of Capaldi's run. And listen, this idea of this feeling like the end of an era, this tone, the deliberate tone as well, I'm not saying that, that's it. That's the end of Doctor Who. No. Please don't get me wrong here. I know Doctor Who continues. I know, it's still a big deal, right? It is. And of course, I'll be continuing off screen. Of course I am. But, I think, many of you can agree, and you've seen it, of course, years ago, and, you felt the same thing. This actually is structured to have that tone, that it is a bit of a sign-off, right? And then again, you have a new Doctor coming in. I mean, again, there's one more episode, but again, Geordie's Doctor is going to come in, and I'm assuming there's a brand new team. I know, the head honcho, the showrunner changes, of course, much like how, it changed from the Tennant era to the Matt Smith era. right? So yeah, of course, Doctor Who is forever, right? And that's one of the things that's a constant of Doctor Who, right? For us as Whovians, right? It's this constant, and you see it once again as the Doctor is left by himself in the TARDIS, right? It happens. It's just that, I don't know, iconic moment. I mean, it's a bit strange to call it iconic moment, but anytime I go through a cycle and I get to that point of the Doctor and the TARDIS and us, right? That's a constant. That is forever. That's one of the, I don't know, that's just one of the parts of being a Whovian, isn't it? At the end of the day, companions come and go. As much as all of us love the companions, as much as the Doctor loves these companions, and the bonds and all those things, those incredible things that are built and experienced, at the end of the day, it's always us and the Doctor and the TARDIS. I've always loved that aspect of it, that bond between us and the Doctor. After it's all said and done, it ends up being us and the Doctor before he finds more bonds, before he finds more special people to connect with. And again, that applies to us as well. And as he lays there, right, that hit me so hard. I just felt like I was kind of frozen in my seat. It kind of hit me really hard that, okay, this is it, man. This is really, truly it. The last finale is about to end, and you've got just the one episode left to cover. But yeah, as he lays there, right, and you get that trip down memory lane, a blast from the past, if you will. All of those lovely faces, all of those lovely companions, those bonds, those connections of a lifetime. Though, I must admit, omitting Rory from that little montage, I think that, that's, you could have put Rory in there. Come on. Rory, I feel like, he's an important part of the Doctor's life as well. If you're going to put Amy in there, I know, yes, Amy and the Doctor have a unique connection, but, Rory, come on, Rory's Rory. He's been around, and, I like Rory. I thought he did play an important part in that dynamic, right? But also, there's, I don't know if this is, I mean, of course, it's not a slip up, it's quite deliberate that they put Clara in there. But, I question that, or I bring that up because the Doctor should not be able to remember Clara at this point, right? But, again, it could function as this idea of, deep in his psyche, Clara still exists. And at this moment, at this really crucial and important moment in the Doctor's life, really close on the edge of regeneration, right? Even though he keeps rejecting it, right? And I think, there's something really interesting going on in this episode with that aspect as well, right? Again, like I said, much to get to. But, perhaps deep in his psyche, Clara still exists, right? And in this moment, all the people that made such a difference in his life, they come to the forefront. Again, I do think, omitting Rory is a bit of a mistake there, but, you see this idea that I keep talking about, end of an era. That montage kind of really reiterates that, doesn't it? It does take us down memory lane all the way back to Rose. And then, of course, you see Bill as well as the most recent companion. But the one that actually kind of gives him that final kick, brings him back, right? Makes him lucid again, is Missy. I really enjoyed that. I really like that touch, that it's Missy who kind of gives him that, final push that he needed to come out of it, to come to. And then you see, once he does come about, it is another kind of like greatest hits moments, isn't it? The first one I'm not sure about, but I'm sure it is a classic Doctor. One of the classic Doctor lines, right? Because it's followed up by, him going through Tennant's lines, final moments, rather, and then Matt Smith's final moments, right? Iconic lines, right before regeneration. So, of course, I'm sure many of you are going to let me know about the Sontaran quote. I'm sure one of the Doctors in the past said that, classic Doctors. And then, of course, that's kind of followed up by the panic-induced rejection of the whole thing, of the whole regeneration process or aspect of it, right? This idea of continuing as someone else, right? This never-ending cycle of it. And you just, you see this idea of the doctor, Capaldi's doctor in this case, just being so done with the whole thing, fed up with the whole thing, tired of the whole thing. And, this is another idea that's explored in Heaven Sent as well, right? This idea of just resting, just finally letting go of it all, right? But here in this case, it's also more so about just staying who he is at this moment in time, who he has become in this moment in time. And it's taken us 3 series to get here, right? 3 really distinct character arcs. I mean, this is the character arc itself, but specific to each one of the series, right? 8, 9, and 10, you see a really different type of Capaldi doctor. He's gone through his own character arc, phenomenal character growth, right? And now I see essentially the final product, right? It took him all this time to get to this, and now, he's kind of faced with the idea of letting it all go once again. Just as he's kind of, landed on who he is, who this doctor is. And of course, I'll kind of come back to this aspect of it, of identity and holding on to who you are, being true to yourself. And I'll bring Bill in as well, because that's integral to her wrap up as well. Her story arc being wrapped up. But indeed, it turns out that the TARDIS does actually bring him to the one point he needs to be at most, right? As the TARDIS does from time to time, right? The one person he needs to meet the most at this point in time, and that ends up being himself, the first Doctor, the original. And of course, it's a rather familiar face in David Bradley, right? Coming back. I mean, he's coming back, but it's interesting, isn't it? Right? He kind of had more of like a documentary approach in the special that I saw. It's a great special as well. But here he's actually, within the canon of the show itself, of the narrative, and now he's actually the first Doctor. Now again, the first Doctor as in the first canon Doctor in the show itself, right? From all that time ago, because I'm sure, the Doctors had other faces. I mean, I know that, right? For a fact that the Doctors had other faces before that as well. As a youngster even, he actually described him and a young master, right? Both of them as teenagers, and, that being one of his first crushes, or his actual first crush, something along those lines in the last episode. But yeah, it appears that the first Doctor is also kind of having that internal tug of war, right? This notion of changing, right? He feels like the whole thing is just ridiculous, right? So yeah, I'm sure that's about to make a rather unique dynamic, right? The first Doctor and the latest Doctor. I think that dynamic alone is about to be so entertaining and just interesting because of, again, the experiences this Doctor has now had, over his incredible lifespan, over, multiple regenerations, in comparison to the original Doctor, right? Of the show, at least. So, the difference in experiences there, the difference in time eras there, I'm sure that's bound to be a lot of fun, right? A lot of interesting things are probably about to come out of all of this. And of course, as all of us know, both of them do end up regenerating, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how they kind of come to terms with accepting that, right? Because that's a given, right? That's set in stone. But yeah, I'm rather excited to see how they kind of influence each other, how they help each other, maybe ultimately come to terms with this change. A change that can be rather scary, especially for the first Doctor, right? It's a different thing for him altogether in comparison to Capaldi's. So of course, I'm really, really excited for that episode, the follow-up episode, the final episode of the FilmBuFF Doctor Who run on YouTube. But yeah, ultimately, all roads lead to regeneration. And as the Doctor said a little bit earlier, Doctor, let go, or let it go. Time enough, right? Right before he kind of performs that kamikaze attack, right? Rather self-destructive once again. But that was part of the plan. That was one of the things that Nardole was concerned about, right? And I've got to say, even Nardole, my thoughts on Nardole. I'm really hot and cold on Nardole. Sometimes he's great, even gets a smile and a chuckle out of me. Sometimes I just cannot stand him. But here Nardole, I think, is given just the right amount of focus. I actually rather liked Nardole's part in this finale, and his part in the continuing lore, I suppose, or the narrative of this, right? Because I suppose he is going to live on for a time, at least for a couple of years, right? But the important bit is that he made the choice after the doctor kind of reminds him that this is the path, right? He is strong enough to do this, but ultimately it is going to end in his death, right? My condolences and all of that. But yeah, he accepted that, and he accepted that he is the person that's best equipped to look after these people for a time, for a couple of years at least. But ultimately, I do believe that all of these characters, be it Nardole, be it Missy, right, be it the Master is a continuing force, right? Be it Bill. I feel like all of them are essentially given really satisfying conclusions here. But before I move on from the TARDIS in the final moments and move on to some of these other talking points, significant talking points at that, that moment the TARDIS kind of lines up, and this is around the time the Doctor is beginning to have these flashbacks. He's beginning to think about his life, and again, you get the lovely montage of all of those wonderful actors and companions. There's that one shot, exterior shot, not exterior, a wide shot of the TARDIS lighting up. That is one of the most magical, mesmerizing shots of the entire show. That right there, that moment. And it's just the TARDIS lighting up. And just seeing it from that angle, my God, it's just perfect. It's beautiful. It is magical. It really, truly is. That set is incredible. And I just don't know how you top that set. But let's take more of a focused approach now on each one of these characters and some of these moments and the story beats and the character arcs at play. Let's begin with the man himself, Peter Capaldi, right? Peter Capaldi's Doctor. And honestly, I feel rather confident at this point in time in saying that this is the definitive Doctor, Peter Capaldi's Doctor. And of course, that is intrinsically tied to Peter Capaldi's approach, his take on the Doctor, right? That's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here in terms of, this, the 12th Doctor, feeling like the definitive Doctor, to me at least. And the crazy thing about all of this is that Capaldi's Doctor still manages to hit those heights, right? To the point that I'm calling him the definitive Doctor, even though I feel like a lot of his time as the Doctor is wasted on just, I don't know, mediocre writing at times. A lot of times, if I'm being honest, Capaldi should have been given much, much better material, right? Much better. And it does feel like a missed opportunity, it kind of stings, kind of sitting here, just kind of looking back and thinking that he just didn't get the best, right? In terms of writing, in terms of the narrative that's being explored through Capaldi's Doctor. I mean, he certainly got some incredible material, right, in his run, right? But it's not enough, right? And the few that I am speaking of, they ended up being all-timers. You think of Heaven Sent, essentially the best episode of Doctor Who, right? And again, it's intrinsically tied to Capaldi. It simply is. But, I feel like Capaldi's Doctor just deserved so much better. So much better. I mean, you look at this series. Listen, folks, half of this series is rather mediocre. Really forgetful stuff. Sorry, not forgetful. Forgettable, right? Really forgettable stuff in many of these episodes that led up to the last episode and this episode. Of course, these two episodes, the final two episodes end up being all-timer episodes. I mean, there's like a 5-6 episode run after Extremis that is just really forgettable stuff. I just really truly feel that they wasted precious time of Capaldi's Doctor. I mean, as a whole, if you kind of tally it out, if you average all of it out, Tennant's Doctor and Matt Smith's Doctor, they got much better episodes, much better writing for many of their episodes. And I feel like Capaldi deserved much more of that, right? Much more of that. And I'm pretty certain that, many of you, or the majority of you, probably agree with that opinion, that, Capaldi didn't get the best material, that unfortunately a lot of his time is wasted. His time as the Doctor, as a 12th. Right, but let's put that aside and actually kind of celebrate Capaldi's Doctor, right? In the past, there have been moments, throughout the 10 seasons, I'm going to call them 10 seasons for now, or 10 seasons, 10 series. There have been moments throughout the 10 seasons or the 10 series that define the Doctor, right? There's been some incredible moments, but I feel like here at this moment in this episode, I might have the quintessential, the defining Doctor moment, right? One that right now is, again, giving me goosebumps, and I'm kind of beginning to get a little bit teary-eyed again, just thinking about this. I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent, because above all, it's kind. Always kind. Ooh, yeah, definitely getting teary-eyed, man. I mean, that right there, it's, it's not some grand speech. He doesn't appear to be some space god, right? It's simple foundational stuff, right? Strong character stuff. This is the Doctor. This is who he is. These are the core values of the Doctor. If I'm ever asked about the Doctor and, who the Doctor is, the character of the Doctor, this is it. This is the moment. This is the clip I'll be showing people. I strongly feel like these are the types of messages that you share with children, with your own children. Hell, I strongly feel that at some point in time, in the near future, hopefully, I'll be sharing these values with my own children, and I do hope to show my children this clip at some point in time, once they're ready. That's how strongly I feel about this. That's how strongly I feel about Capaldi as an actor as well. This is, of course, as quite an experienced consumer of storytelling, I've got a whole list of things that I'll be showing to my future children. This is certainly in that list as well. The essentials, if you will. Above all, it's kind, always kind. It's beautiful stuff. It really is, and I think it's especially poignant coming from the 12th Doctor, right? Given his own identity crisis back in Series 8. And, I honestly just feel that the writing, the material just feels just so much more authentic and earnest, being delivered by the exceptional Peter Capaldi. And I just think that the kindness and the compassion of the Doctor is so damn lovely to see here, isn't it? Be it with the girl, right? The little girl, be it with Bill's situation, be it his plea with the Masters, Master and Missy. Simply put, this is a Doctor who knows exactly who he is now, right? Played by an actor who has a complete understanding of the character, right? And knows exactly how he wants to play that character. I think it's just been a fantastic journey of self-discovery for the 12th over the span of these past 3 series, right? Which is why the idea of letting go, right? Changing into someone else again is such a tough pill to swallow, right? To give up this clarity that he has earned over the course of this cycle. I mean, let's go back to Series 8, He has such a distinct and new take on the Doctor, right? As if the Doctor is hiding, right? Didn't feel that he even knew if he is a good man, and perhaps even hiding from that kindness. And then came Series 9. That was all about the Doctor embracing it and celebrating it quite loudly at times, right? And then finally here in Series 10, it's all about the Doctor, Capaldi's Doctor, embodying it, right? Right till the end. And now, in this final chapter, this Christmas special that's about to come up, I think I'll probably get to see a Doctor that is going to continue refusing the regeneration, perhaps for long stretches of the episode, or the story, alongside the other Doctor, the original, the first Doctor, though ultimately, it feels like, through the experiences that these 2 Doctors are going to have with each other in this Christmas special, should get each one of them ready, right? By the end of it, perhaps, by the conclusion of it, perhaps, or maybe he'll go out kicking and screaming, right? Reluctantly, but, I just don't see that type of approach here. I do believe that both of these Doctors are about to bring out the best in each other, that ultimately the TARDIS truly felt that this is the exact person he needs to meet, himself at that stage. But yeah, that scene, the Doctor, the Master, and Missy, that's just an incredible moment. It's one of the standout scenes of the entire show, right? And it's always going to be one of my core memories of Doctor Who, the Where I Fall speech. And like I just alluded to, this is something that kind of takes some years to arrive at as well, right? He simply would not be able to give this passionate speech and plea back in series 8, right? Maybe not even back in series 9, but certainly not back in series 8, right? Because again, he's tackling his own doubts, his own internal tug of war about who he is, right? The identity crisis and all of that. And also, it really felt that for the most part, it's kind of directed at the master, right? Sim's master, as if he's planting the idea. And it's an idea that might not take and does not take then and there, right? But perhaps in time, lots of time to think about it. And ultimately, by the time he does regenerate into Missy, I do kind of see a totally different take and dynamic with Capaldi's doctor. Ultimately, it is Missy who breaks through and, makes the choice to stand with the doctor. But even so, I do think the master actually listened and took it all in. Yeah, even though, he voices it and he's like, this is the face of a man who didn't hear a thing you had to say. I don't buy that completely. I just don't, There's some really, maybe this is headcanon. Maybe, people might shut this down, but I do think Sim's master, and again, this is through his subtle acting, his expressions as well, I think. I do think he is taking it in, right? But he's just simply not at that point in his life, just yet. And the thing about the master is that he completely understood that he can't always go toe to toe with the doctor as far as, outsmarting him, right? He simply can't do that, but he can always spite him, right? Spite him by refusing to ever give the doctor the satisfaction, right? He straight up just refused to regenerate back in The Last of the Time Lords, right? And that is why he kills Missy as well, right? I mean, he would rather destroy his own future than let her stand with the doctor, right? I mean, the master simply just could not stand the idea or accept the idea that this is who he ends up becoming, right? The repentant master in the form of Missy, right? And you see that even throughout the episode, he's always calling her out on these little mannerisms, these little changes in the attitude, right? That Missy showcases that's clearly a part of her nature, her character at this point, right? And the one that really just kind of gets the master quite agitated is this idea of empathy. He cannot stand that idea that, his future version becomes empathetic. And I think it's actually a really great moment as, the doctor and Cyber Bill at that point, they do come strolling in and, she said, oh, you just had to bring her along, didn't you? That's essentially just how she sees Bill still, right? As a person, even though, she's in this foreign body. And again, I'm going to have a whole section about, the body horror of being trapped in a body that you don't feel comfortable in, that you feel just out of touch with, right? There's some, interesting commentary going on there as well. But yeah, in this episode, you really kind of truly see the contrast. The master and the doctor see Missy through a totally different lens. The master sees it as a defeat, ultimately, right? That this is who he ends up becoming, right? Someone that is capable of this, someone that is ultimately capable of siding with the doctor, is able to actually get to that point of making a choice of that magnitude. And, as expected and as discussed in the, analysis portion of the last episode, I did get that really interesting dynamic, right? Of the master and Missy and their contrasting reactions to things. Yes, at times they're perfectly in line, in tune. But then at other times it's kind of like night and day, isn't it? So I thought that was one of the standout moments of this episode, components of this episode, rather, the Missy and Master dynamic, right? It's certainly, fun at times. There's a lot of camp as well. If you go to the opening of the episode itself, the rooftop dance sequence and them just kind of bouncing off of each other, just kind of shooting the shit, if you will, and just kind of, messing with the doctor. But, again, there is a performative aspect to it as well. If you look at Missy, right, to kind of appease the master, right? You see at one point she does knock out the master, and again, there's quite a comedic element to that as well. At that point, she makes it known that, okay, this isn't me fully gone or anything, right? As expected, it's this internal tug of war, right? Internal conflict, identity crisis, right? Being faced with her former self. But, this is once again reminding me of the Series 8 Doctor, right? So allow me to take a bit of a detour, and I'll come back to the Master and Missy and that, dynamic with the Doctor. Series 8 Doctor was quite pragmatic, quite alien, right? In comparison to the ones before him. Alien in a different sense, because even Matt Smith had quite an alien Doctor, right? Totally different type of alien, though. I'm sure you know the point I'm making here. But, he came across blunt and grumpy, right? Certainly came across grumpy, to then go on to this fantastic character arc, with some fantastic supporting characters to help facilitate that change that came about. I mean, the time he ends up spending with Clara just ends up being so integral to all of it, right? Even the limited time he spends with me, Maisie Williams' character, that had an impact on him as well, right? Then, of course, Clara's death and departure. Then you've got Missy, River Song, even Bill, of course. And then ultimately trying to help his friend Missy as well. But yeah, going back to the Master and Missy, hey man, I mean, sometimes you need to kill the person you were to be the person you want to be, right? But then also, a lot of times, the person you are kills your future, right? I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in the Missy and Master dynamic as far as, your actions and this idea of being able to change. Can you change? Should you be allowed to change? Again, the idea of your actions following you around, right? Is it ever too late, or is it never too late, right? Ultimately, I'd say, Missy kind of gets a sacrificial redemption, right? Because I think a full-on redemption might be maybe a step too far for someone with such a past, right? So I think in that sense, it's a rather realistic take as well on Missy. And you see that Missy, as the Master just kind of walks out on the Doctor after his, passionate plea, you see that Missy is, quite emotional. You see the tears building up. She's got that smile on her face. And even, as he's giving his speech, his plea, right? You see, oh my God, again, the photography of this episode is just top notch. Some of the best I've seen in Doctor Who. But, a lot of those really beautiful, subtle shots of, the Doctor indirectly speaking to Missy, right? You'll see he's, looking at the Master. He's trying to get through to the Master, hopefully over time. And then, the camera cuts to Missy, right? You'll just see her eyes. Again, looking a little bit teary-eyed, looking over at the Doctor, right? Because these things resonate with Missy. They do. They simply do. And you see, she straight up just tells him, it's the one thing she wants the most as well. But no, right? She's not able to accept the one thing that she wants most, right? Because I believe she knows that she has to go on and do that, right? She has to go and stab herself, or her, her past self and all of that, right? She understands that she has to do that. Even if the thing that she really truly wants to do in this moment in time is stand with the Doctor. But listen, ultimately, the Doctor's never going to know. He's never going to know the things that Missy ends up doing. There's a lot of that actually at play here. Most of these characters do not know how things turned out for the others. The Doctor doesn't know how things turn out for Bill, right? Unless, maybe Bill shows up in the next episode, possibly. As of this point, he doesn't know how things played out for Bill. As of this point, he thinks Bill died as Cyber Bill, as a Cyberman, right? Though, of course, there's, there is that idea of not wanting to live in a foreign body, not, wanting to live if you cannot be you, right? That applies to both Bill and the Doctor. There's an understanding there. But, I'll come to that in my section for Bill. Bill doesn't know, right? If the Doctor lives or how things played out for him from that point on. The Doctor doesn't know that she was ultimately saved from that torture, right? that she was transformed, restored, right, in a different capacity, of course, through the lovely Heather, who makes a cameo appearance. Listen, sure, maybe some of that feels like, yeah, they could have set that up a bit more. But listen, I liked it. I liked it, and I think Bill deserved that, right? The character of Bill deserved that. And even Nardole doesn't really truly know how things are going to turn out for the Doctor. I mean, Nardole's situation is understood, that at most, he'll be around for a few more years, right, protecting these people. And again, let me kind of go back to Nardole. Again, it's a limited appearance type of episode for Nardole, but, there's some really poignant moments. And, I kind of touched up on it a little bit earlier. There is that great moment as they say goodbye, right? And he recognizes and understands the heartbreaking tribute that the Doctor pays him, right? So I thought that's a really, really great moment. And again, this type of scene kind of goes back to the point I was making a little bit earlier, right? The approach, the slow burn approach, the intimate and introspective nature of it allows the story to breathe. But yeah, as I am on the topic of, how things kind of ended for each one of these characters and how, they don't really know how things played out for each other, I think it does a decent job, right? It strikes the right balance of exploring, or a continuation of it, at least from the last episode as well, the potentially dreadful consequences of, what can happen traveling with the Doctor, but then also highlighting the kinder angle. These characters who, like the Doctor, are willing to do the most difficult things because it's right, because it's kind. And that brings me to Bill. Where there's tears, there's hope. There's hope. So one of the biggest talking points in the conclusion of the last episode is how exactly are they going to handle or deal with an entire episode of Bill being a Cyberman, that being her new permanent form, at least on the outside, right, the exterior, because ultimately, due to her resilient nature, her resilient mind, Bill still maintains her identity as Bill, right? And I love that aspect of it, of course. And as the Doctor points out as well. So yeah, going into it, I honestly kind of actually expected an entire episode of Cyberman Bill, I suppose maybe a bit of a brain fart moment on my end, not thinking around a solution, I suppose. And ultimately, it actually ends up being quite a clever and interesting approach with Cyber Bill, right? And it's ultimately such an effective solution for screen as well, right? Because it maximizes Pearl Mackey's screen time, as it should, right? Who I believe essentially gave her best performance of the series in this episode, right? Or at least some of her strongest work in this series. And ultimately, that approach actually ends up being rather poignant as well, right? Presenting that side of, what humans go through and experience because of cyber conversion, right? Now, of course, Bill's situation is a little bit different, like I just stated, because of her resilient mind, right? Being able to hold on and maintaining her identity, right? Even in this foreign body she finds herself in, right? Essentially a prison that she's ultimately liberated from, thankfully so by the end of it, by the returning Heather, right? Because of that bond, that connection. Listen, it's one of the most satisfying things I've experienced in Doctor Who. Bill actually just not being doomed to that fate, right? That she is somehow, at points it felt really impossible, right? I just couldn't see how, right? You saw, I'm telling the Doctor, but how, Doctor? How could this possibly be overturned? At one point, as it gives you that sudden shift to Bill in the barn, right? Bill as in, Pearl Mackey, you begin to think of the impossible. You begin to think, oh, did something happen off screen? My delusional ass actually, at least for a moment, thought, oh yes, okay, something happened, something allowed for this, right? Even though deep inside I knew this is impossible, right? But that's how it's presented, isn't it? And then of course, slowly it becomes rather clear that this is more than meets the eye. But then also, this idea of Bill being rather resilient, it ends up being a bit of a double-edged sword, doesn't it? Because then it becomes about this jarring and soul-crushing reality of struggling to come to terms with her new permanent form, right? I mean, she's so resilient that, it ends up essentially functioning as a perception filter, as the doctor stated, right? She essentially sees herself as herself. And then, of course, slowly, bit by bit, that body horror aspect of it begins to creep in, right? You'll have these incredible moments of her, walking up on the doctor, and then that shadow being tossed on the wall of the barn, her kind of putting her hand up, and you see that rubber not the masks, sorry, the rubber glove of the Cybermen, the Mondasian Cybermen, who I suppose aren't really featured all that much in this episode, right? I mean, it's rather exciting in the last episode to see this new take on the Cybermen, again, new for me, but then here, they're not really out and about all that much. Other than, Cyber Bill, and that there's that one that shoots up the doctor, right? Right before the big kamikaze moment for the doctor. I mean, yeah, I suppose that's a little bit disappointing, right? And they end up kind of just going back to the whole, RoboCop look. The look I'm not really too fond of, to be honest, as I said in the last episode's discussion. But yeah, this idea of Bill having to come to terms with her new permanent form, I mean, it's devastating. It really is. And man, one of the most heartbreaking moments I've experienced in this show is Bill telling the doctor that she can feel the programming, the Cybermen programming taking over, right? Piece by piece. As if it's her hanging on in a hurricane. My God, that just as she's describing that, I just really, really got emotional thinking about that, right? To see someone so full of life, so full of personality, being stripped away from all of that, just bit by bit, being suppressed. It's tough, man. It's a really tough watch at times, isn't it? And then, of course, the master comes in and he's taunting her. And listen, at that point, as you saw, I got really heated, and that's a good sign. That right there is a sign that John Sims is doing his job, right? A rather good job. Because at one point, I felt like just elbowing the guy in the jaw, right? Yeah, he's doing a good job. That's for damn sure. And just imagine Bill standing there, the level of betrayal, right, that she must be feeling at that point, right? The heartbreak that she must be feeling at that point. She holds it strong on the outside, at least, tells him no, I'm fine. But then, there's that beautiful transition, right? The visual language of this episode, in relation to Cyber Bill and that approach of still using Pearl Mackie, it's beautifully showcased in that transition, right? Going from Cyberman body to Bill, just crying and just heartbroken. But yeah, going back to the scene in the barn as the doctor comes in, right? Of course, you've got the lady who comes in. She's rather apprehensive, of course, and that kind of begins to make things clear, right? That this is still a Cyberman. Then the girl comes in, who still, even though she believes that she's not afraid, you just look at that body, the Cyberman body, the Mondasian Cyberman body. It's a behemoth, right? It's a jarring sight of something of that size, just coming towards you, right? So that takes me to the scene with the doctor coming in, right? The tone of that scene is just so finely balanced, isn't it? Or rather, it's on the edge of a knife. There's this palpable tension that builds and builds as the doctor tries to explain the impossible to her, right? And that's how it feels to Bill. It's just nonsensical and it feels so bizarre because to her, nothing has changed. It's her, right? It feels like her. And again, great physical acting from both Capaldi and Mackie as well. Because, Capaldi really sells this idea of this behemoth Mondasian Cyberman, walking towards him. And internally, that Cyberman, through Bill, is quite upset, confused, and on edge, right? Ready to just explode. And the doctor tries to tell her, you don't have the luxury of being angry in this moment. But then, like I said, she has every right to be just angry and frustrated about the whole thing. But again, it took something like her essentially losing control in that moment as the Cyberman body of hers and, punching that massive hole through the barn, essentially through that beam of hers, to kind of understand, okay, this is, why she has to maintain a level of control here. But yeah, going back to this idea of cyber conversion, this forceful and aggressive process that strips away who you are or who you used to be, right? To essentially fall in line, to just be another mindless person following orders. It dictates a loss of identity and agency, doesn't it? Right? That's part of the package of being a Cyberman, right? Being turned into a Cyberman. And Bill made it quite clear to the doctor, right? As a friend, that she did not want to continue living if she couldn't live as herself, as Bill Potts, and everything that Bill Potts or being Bill Potts means, right? And again, explores that idea of staying true to yourself, right? Dying rather than becoming someone new or someone you're not. Being forced into someone you're not, right? And again, like I alluded to earlier or touched upon a little bit earlier, it applies to the doctor as well, right? In his rejection of this most recent regeneration, I can't keep on being somebody else. And also in this case, given Bill Potts and her identity, you can also look at cyber conversion as an allegory for losing your LGBT identity. I think it does function in that capacity as well, right? And I'm guessing that is by design. This idea of being suppressed, having to fall in line. But yeah, ultimately I'm rather satisfied in how they handled the cyber Bill aspect of it, right? And that Pearl Mackie does end up getting quite a bit of screen time. And some of these shots of cyber Bill, right, be it the cold open, her carrying the doctor's body, I mean, that right there is an iconic moment, iconic shot. Even just the idea of a Cyberman body holding the doctor, right, looking after the doctor's body, that right there is just so incredible, isn't it? Right? Even if you take away the idea that it's Bill actually within that Cyberman. And then again, a little bit later on in the conclusion, Bill shuffling through that battlefield, essentially, that the doctor ends up creating, the aftermath of him truly letting go at that moment. But yeah, her shuffling through that battlefield and just crying her eyes out for the doctor and just the situation as a whole, right? Looking to the heavens. But again, as I started this segment, where there's tears, there's hope. And of course, at that point, Heather comes into the equation. She liberates Bill from that prison, right? The Cyberman body. And now Bill gets to live forever, essentially. Of course, it's a different type of living, but Bill gets to be herself, and nothing is more important than being herself, right? Maintaining that identity and living how she chooses to live. But yeah, that kind of brings me full circle now, doesn't it? Without hope, without witness, without reward, it essentially applies to both the doctor and Missy. Right, there's that moment as the doctor kind of walks off, and there's that incredible shot of him kind of, getting his sonic screwdriver ready. Right, it's like a hero shot, and I'm sure I'll probably feature that in my post-episode analysis shots. But yeah, I kind of touched up on this a little bit earlier, right? That most of these characters don't even know how things ended or played out for the others. Like, in this case, the doctor's never going to know, right? Or actually, maybe I'll take that back. Maybe, who knows, down the line, I know the master is going to be around, right? Maybe, let's see. I am going to continue, of course, off screen, but, I am going to continue. So I'm still excited. One thing I do want to make clear one more time is I'm still excited about Doctor Who, right? It's just a choice to maybe, move on to some other stuff now as far as content creation is concerned, because a lot of time and effort goes into this, right? But yeah, as of that point, the doctor did not know that Missy ends up making that choice, right? Ultimately, Missy knew that this is the right time, this is the right thing to do. But of course, once again, it just ends in the most fitting manner possible as far as, the master is concerned, right? Shooting each other in the back, stabbing each other in the back. It really is rather fitting, isn't it? And, I've got to say, let's, a round of applause for the brilliant Michelle Gomez, right? She's been such a fantastic addition to the ensemble cast, the ongoing ensemble cast of this show. And, she arrives at the same time as Peter Capaldi, right? This is a Capaldi staple, a Capaldi doctor staple in Missy. And, ultimately, that final shot of her, yes, it's not a garden, but it does kind of feel like the opening moments of Missy's character introduction as well, right? I can't remember the name of that character, but, that cyborg robotic fellow that ends up, meeting Missy in that place, right? It's a garden. There's a garden in the middle as well. But yeah, as you saw, I got rather emotional seeing that final shot of Missy. She made such an impact. Right, it's a totally different type of character. It's a complex relationship, between her and the Doctor. But by the end of this run, she is immediately like one of my all-time favorites in terms of Doctor Who characters and companions, and again, members of this incredible ensemble cast. Right, she really truly is right at the top of my list, and that's one of the reasons I did feel rather emotional seeing her dead. So yeah, it's just been so much fun seeing Michelle Gomez's portrayal of Missy. And I think that should do it for this one, folks. I really enjoyed this episode. Like I said, I do think it might just be the strongest finale of the whole series. I love the slow burn approach, just the intimate nature of the whole thing. It's really, in some sense, it is kind of similar to the time of the Doctor, right? Again, Matt Smith's final outing as the Doctor, him protecting a small community from the incoming threat, right? But this is even more intimate than that, right? And it's certainly not as bombastic as that episode. So yeah, I really enjoyed that approach and everything it allowed for. And now there's just one final thing left to do. That's to get to the final episode of the Capaldi era, and again, the final episode from my own, content creation era for Doctor Who. Bittersweet, of course, but I'm excited. I'm excited to get to that and to see how it's handled, right? Because again, like I said, a lot of this episode functions really quite effectively as, a regeneration episode, a final outing for a Doctor, Capaldi's Doctor specifically. But yeah, let's see how that plays out. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. Also, if you are interested in full length, timer-based full length, of course, consider checking out the Patreon page. The links are in the description and the pinned comment. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you so much for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you one last time for the final episode of the Capaldi era, and the final episode for my own Doctor Who coverage here on YouTube. Until then, take it easy.